everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to the Charlotte Museum of History, and I want to go to follow up a video that I did in October of last year. If you were around on the channel back then, Michael and I were going around Charlotte and we were looking for places to do some urban exploring. And I took Michael to the north side of town, the Mallard Glen, Mallard Creek area. I used to live in an apartment there, probably 15 years ago, 2009, 2010-ish. And on the back side of the apartment was a little shortcut you could cut through to get to the highway if you knew about it. And it took you past this old, dilapidated, run-down wooden building. It was not chained or padlocked or anything. There were no trespassing signs, and it was super spooky. I never went inside it, but I always kind of wanted to know what was in there. It was an eyesore, guys. And I asked at the apartment complex in the front office what it was. And she told me that it was like an old tool shed or something. At the time, I had no idea that the building was of historical significance, and I'm super happy to see that it has now been adopted by the Charlotte Museum of History and completely restored in a super authentic way. I have seen pictures of it online, but I'm really excited to see it in person, see its new facelift, and I'm going to give you the history of the SILOAM school in this video. I hope you enjoy watching. I am going to apologize up front. I will be in a tour with a lot of other people, so there may be some odd cuts or swings of the camera, and that's because I always try as hard as I can not to film anybody else if I can help it. I don't like to ruin anyone else's museum experience. But we're going to at least get to see the school from the outside very well, and I'll show you as much of the inside as we can. And we're going to talk about the history of the Rosenwald project and the SILOAM school.
Today, we are at the Charlotte Museum of History, and we're here to look at a restored schoolhouse that was originally built probably in the 1920s as part of the Rosenwald project. This schoolhouse sat abandoned and falling apart for decades right outside of a popular apartment complex on the north side of Charlotte where I used to live. At the time, I didn't understand or appreciate its significance, but I'm here today to see what a beautiful initiative project has done over the past couple of years on this building to restore it to as close as possible to its original condition. There was a time in the American South when a child's future depended on nothing more than the color of their skin. For Black children living under the Jim Crow laws, education was not simply unequal, it was intentionally and devastatingly denied. Rural communities often had no school at all or were forced to make do with collapsing buildings, outdated textbooks, and no government support. But in the early 20th century, amid this widespread injustice, something remarkable happened. A movement began, quiet at first, but monumental in impact. It was sparked by the partnership of two men from very different worlds, Booker T. Washington, the visionary educator and principal of Tuskegee Institute, and Julius Rosenwald, a white Jewish businessman from Chicago who had made his fortune running Sears, Roebuck and Company. Together, they set out to build schools for Black children across the South, and in doing so, they helped reshape the future of American education. Booker T. Washington had long believed that education was the key to Black advancement and dignity. But he also knew that Southern state governments had no intention of supporting the cause. If Black children were going to learn, their communities would have to build the schools themselves. In Rosenwald, he found a man willing to help fund that dream. Rosenwald was practical, philanthropic, and deeply moved by the injustice he saw in the American South. When Washington proposed a pilot program to build a handful of schools in rural Alabama, Rosenwald agreed to fund it. The results were immediate and powerful. Schools that were filled with light and possibility, where children could learn, grow, and imagine a different kind of life. Rosenwald saw the potential, and by 1917, he established the Julius Rosenwald Fund to expand the program across the region. What made the Rosenwald Initiative so unique was its model. It wasn't a handout, it was a partnership. The fund provided partial financial support, but local Black communities were expected to raise the money themselves. They donated land, held bake sales and fish fries, made bricks, sawed timber, and built the structures with their own hands. Some contributed pennies they could barely spare. Others gave labor or materials. White school boards were required to contribute as well, though usually as little as possible. But by requiring local investment, the Rosenwald Fund empowered communities. It gave people a deep sense of ownership and pride. These schools weren't imposed from the outside. They were born from within by people determined to give their children what they themselves had been denied. Between 1917 and 1932, the Rosenwald Fund helped construct nearly 5,000 schools, along with hundreds of teacher homes and vocational workshops. They rose up in fields, by railroad tracks, on back roads, and in neighborhoods. Each one was built using carefully designed architectural plans that prioritized natural light, ventilation, and simple functional beauty. The designs were drafted by Samuel L. Smith, an African-American architect working with the Tuskegee Institute. They offered schools with 1, 2, or 3 classrooms, depending on the size of the community, and they set a new standard for rural education.
The idea of this school was that it was supposed to provide educational opportunity for African-American students in the early 1900s. There's a system called the Rosenwald School Fund that was established at the time. The guy who owned Sears and Roebuck established it to create more opportunity. If you're familiar, Sears and Roebuck had this system where they would list a whole house in their magazine, and you could order an entire build your own house kit from Sears. They used the same idea for these schools, and they made a catalog that's in here with all these schools, all the parts that you needed to make it, exactly how to put them together, and the best way to face the building and care for the building all together. That way any community could kind of pick one up and start their own school just as they needed it.
These buildings stood in stark contrast to the decaying shacks that passed for schools in many Black communities before. They were symbols of hope, dignity, and a collective effort.
It smells like ink. Yeah, doesn't it? Yeah. I think some of that's the paint. The paint we used in here was accurate to the time. It's called linseed oil paint, and it took forever to dry, so it still kind of smells like wet paint. But they finished the last coat in like June of last year, so it's been like this for a while.
Across Mecklenburg, there were once more than a dozen Rosenwald schools. Very few remain today, but their legacy lingers in the memory of the former students and in the stories passed down through families. There are physical traces left on the land. Some of these schools have been lost to neglect, others to development, but those that remain are being rediscovered, restored, and honored for what they represent. The Rosenwald schools were more than just buildings. They were acts of resistance. They were declarations of worth in a world that constantly tried to diminish Black lives. They educated generations of leaders, teachers, musicians, and civil rights activists. The students who walked through their doors would go on to desegregate universities, lead protests, and shape the future of America. Even after the fund stopped building schools in 1932, its influence lived on, rippling through every corner of the South where a Rosenwald school had once stood. Today, efforts to preserve these historic schools are gaining momentum. Local communities, historians, and preservationists are working to restore what time and neglect have threatened to erase. In 2023, national advocacy reached a new level with renewed calls to create a Rosenwald School National Historical Park, one that would formally recognize the extraordinary legacy of this quiet revolution. And it deserves to be remembered, because in an era defined by separation and cruelty, the Rosenwald schools offered something radical, the belief that every child, regardless of race or class, deserves a place to learn, a place to grow, and a place to hope.
Doesn't it?
It's
Yeah.
on the 14th. That's actually on the first grade. So this is actually. People writing on this.
Yeah. So we got all of these donated to us by people that live in town, and this is kind of like what it would look like. Not all the desks would have been the same style or match each other. They would work with what they had. So you have all these attached desks. These little circles in here, those are for ink wells. So they would have ink in there, and they have a quill or a pencil to work with the ink, and then they write with that. A couple of them though, like that one, have been filled in so that they can be used for other stuff all the time. This is that catalog there.
This one also.
Install all the windows. But the reason we're able to do that so well and so effectively is because a giant catalog with every part number, what they look like.
That's what
their
this is?
dimensions, right? So for preservation, this is glorious, right? We get to say we know exactly what we need to put in there. A lot of times you're playing a guessing game or spending hours and hours doing research trying to figure out what would it look like, what would they have used. But here is a nice booklet that says use this pole, use these weights. The window should have this many frames.
Like a whole blueprint because of Sears. Right?
Exactly.
That's crazy. That's handy.
Yeah. It's kind of wild to think how far things have come. But these schools were not uncommon to see throughout North Carolina. In fact, North Carolina was the state that utilized the Rosenwald fund system the most. And even today, there are lots of these buildings that exist that have survived. Most of them no longer schools. They're either historic places or have transformed into different things, just like this place did. But I want to say at least 100 of the original buildings are still out there.
Is this the original floor?
Some of it is. Some of it is. Yeah. They tried to save as much as they could. But again, you'll notice some pieces are like each other and some kind of stick out in place.
That's all from the auto body shop, right?
Most of it.
The stains.
Yes. Yeah. If you see all the black ones, that's all oil trips.
Wow. That's so cool.
And in this time period too, important to remember that your classmates weren't there every single day, right? You would come in and one of the kids next to you might be gone for the day or for the week, or maybe for the month.
Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. That was really powerful for me. It was very, very surreal, a little bit emotional even at one point. To remember back on my life when I was in my very early 20s and I was certainly not appreciating history quite the way I do now, and wanting to honor and preserve things the way I do now, and having lived by when that school was sitting just in a dilapidated state. I saw it at its absolute worst. When it didn't seem like anybody cared about it, I definitely didn't care about it. And now to see it restored to its glory of its heyday and be honored and preserved in this museum it's really emotional for me. It's very powerful. I'm so grateful and glad to see that has that the school has been saved, and I'm just really grateful that I got to see it. And kudos to the Charlotte Museum of History and all those involved for bringing this to pass. So I'm a little emotional right now, and I'm going to end this video. I'll see you guys another day in another adventure. Bye, everybody.